Good evening and welcome, everybody. We are a little late, but I think we will get going. The coffee might finally be ready. So I'd like to welcome you all here tonight, and I'd like to thank you for coming to hear some really good presentations and some new information that I'm pretty sure some of you will not have heard. My name is Lynn Hambley, and I will be your MC for the evening. Some housekeeping. We have the washrooms are out in the main hall where you first came in, and the exits are at the back either side. But I'm pretty sure we're not going to have a disaster and need them. So tonight we have 3 different presenters, and that's a lot, but we're going to get through it. And we have 3 because the new Foundation of Freedom document has been released by APP, and you'll learn about that later, but we're pretty proud of it, and we're pretty excited because it's an interactive document for everyone to partake in. So you'll notice that there's cue cards on the chairs, and there will be a couple ladies that'll be walking around if you need another card or if they're for your questions. Because we have 3 presenters, the Q&A may be a little shorter, so the way to facilitate everybody's questions is if we gather them on the cards and they're written, oftentimes there's kind of duplicate questions, and we can sort that out, and I just think we can facilitate more questions that way. And the gentleman will end up being up here, and you'll have your chance to have asked questions of all 3 of them. So when you first came in, you walked by the table at the back with the APP backdrop and the ladies, and that is where you can sign up for an APP membership free if you are not already a member, and if you are, you can do it anyway. Many people think they're APP members, but they maybe have just signed up for the newsletter. So I encourage you all to please become an APP member. And then you will notice there's another banner off to the right-hand side that says Independent Alberta, Faith in Alberta, Future for Our Family, Freedom to Dream. Sorry, that's a little small for me. Anyhow, those banners are to give away tonight by donation, and there's a bucket there. So if you think you'd like to put one of those banners up, by all means, just take one and drop something into the donation bucket. Also at the back, we have a stop and talk table. That is the initiative that we are able to have conversations with Albertans so that we can talk to the people that aren't in favor or don't know whether they're in favor. And it seems to be such a polarizing topic, right? There's a lot of weird things going on, as happened in the petition phase. So this stop and talk is basically a safe place that we're hoping the want to stay side is willing to come and have a conversation. And there's many really good pages on there with information that is good for you to be able to have conversations with your friends and your family, because this is only one when everybody in this room and everybody in this province speaks to their neighbors and speaks to their friends, and we multiply like a grassroots movement. So I urge you to stop and talk at the back and have a look there. And they do have some handouts, and also there's a QR code where you can just go whenever, and it'll lead you, and you can print some of those documents if you so decide. So I'm going to ask everybody to put their phones on silent so that we don't have any interruptions and we can get through this. I don't know why I look at my notes. I should just say it. So I'm sure all of you know the history and how APP was started, but I'm going to give a little rundown for those people that might be watching Max's live stream and maybe not understand this. So APP is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit educational society. The mission is to educate, inspire, and advocate for all Albertans the benefits of freedom and prosperity through independence. It began in 2021 in a humble oil field shop in Nisku, where a group of Albertans that were tired of the inefficiencies of the Alberta government and the overreach of the federal government met, and from that, the APP was born. So we do have 3 speakers, but what we do, at least what I always do, and rural Albertans seem to enjoy, is that we open our evening with a prayer. So if you so desire, please join me with this prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for gathering us here tonight and that we are free to gather together this evening. Lord, we ask that you will open our hearts and minds to hear truth, and may all we say be be honoring to you. Father God, we desire many things, and one of them is to be free and a prosperous society. We recognize this only comes through your ways. Please give each of us the discernment, the wisdom, and the ability and direction that we need to get there. We know that all goodness comes from you and you alone. We ask for your help to get accurate information to Albertans. We ask that you give us freedom and prosperity now and for future generations. Your word says if we turn from our wicked ways and humble ourselves and pray, that you would hear our prayers and heal our land. Lord, can you please heal us and our land? Thank you, God, for the speakers that are here tonight, for their hard work and commitment. Please strengthen them in their leadership roles, let their information be accurate and true, and keep them safe as they are traveling all around this great province. Help us stay focused on you, and may we receive all the blessings you can pour out on us, your people. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. So our first speaker tonight is Mitch Sylvestre. And I think many of you have already heard Mitch. And Mitch is a dear friend of mine. I got involved and knew Mitch from about 2024-ish maybe, when I got interested in politics. Mitch is an everyday Albertan. He's an entrepreneur. He's a father, a grandfather, and he's a fearless freedom fighter. He has stand in the front of all of this for us, and he does it as a volunteer. Tonight you will be interested again because he's always changing his presentation. It is my great honor to introduce my friend, Mitch Sylvestre.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome. There you are, right there. That's how come we're here today. So what's the next step? The next step is we got to win the next vote. How are we going to do that? We got to get more votes than them. That sounds easy, but it's not that easy. We got to make sure that, I was looking the other day, we got 238,000 people in our contact list. Everybody gets 2. Everybody gets 1, we win. Not that hard. It's really, really hard. I've been trying to tell people this for 2 months, and nobody's adding the 2. So I'm asking you, every one of you's got low-hanging fruit, including me. Actually, one of my 2 is my wife. Just thought I'd add that. Throw that at you. Imagine, she says, I don't know if I'm signed. I said, well, I better put you in. But she was a sure thing. But at any rate, we have to start thinking about that now. We're 60 or so days away from this vote, and we're not going to get another chance. So please, I would entertain the fact that we all have to do this work ourselves. And we can't do it by ourselves. We need all of you. Our big weapon is 238,000 people that we have in our group. That's always been our big weapon. So you are our weapon. They have wealth, they have influence, they have the media, they have all of that, but they don't have those 238,000 people because none of them are on their side, right? And then every one of you knows more people. So I want you to think about that before we get going here. And my job is going to be explain to you what continues to be going on. And then most of you people in this room already know. But my point by the time I'm done is I'm going to explain to you that it's going faster now. How many people have never been to a political meeting before? Good, not very many, but welcome. Thank you. Don't be afraid to come back. All right, here we go. All right, so this is what you guys did this winter. You stood out there, you got signatures, you got abused, you got yelled at, but you won. With 290,000 legitimate signatures there, the list was not seated, even though they tried to prove that we did it the wrong way. We did it the right way. I knew that we did it the right way. There was no question in my mind. When we were getting the signatures, and I had all those boxes and I was just ready to deliver them, I knew that there wasn't going to be 10% wrong, and I was correct. I was absolutely right. So here you are, standing out here in the middle of winter time, and this was a cold winter. I was driving through Claire's home. It was 35 below with a 20-mile-an-hour wind. The flags were just out there like this. And there's a guy there, knock if you want a sign. He was inside a trailer, like a cargo trailer, with a heater. And I said, so how many signatures are you hoping to get today? He said, if I get 5, I'll be really happy. All day at 40 below in a cargo trailer. Knock if you want to come in. And I knocked on the door and I went in. Turns out the guy's originally from Bonneville, so we knew each other. Amazing. Anyways, here we go. Ayn Rand wrote a book that I read when I was in high school. It's called Atlas Shrugged. And she says that when you see that in order to produce, you need to obtain permission from men who produce nothing. When you see that money is flowing to those who deal, not in goods but in favors. When you see that men get richer by graft, than by pull, than by work. And your laws don't protect you against them, but protect them against you. When you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming a self-sacrifice, you may know that your society is doomed. So this is 50, 60, 70 years ago. And our premier said that this was her favorite book. I don't think it's her favorite book anymore, sadly. When I became premier, I thought I could fix everything in 6 or 7 months, but everything's broken. That's very much in line with what we saw over there, with what Ayn Rand said. And I'm going to read you this little thing. This is Ann Landers, and those of you that are as old as me remember her. She used to write a column in the paper, and every paper. And dear Anne, I'm an English teacher, and my students are reading George Orwell's 1984, which back then, when I was in high school, we read that. We thought that was absolute fantasy, would never happen. I'm having a difficult time explaining communism, socialism, and fascism without giving a time-consuming history lesson. I recall you printed a humorous explanation of these concepts using cows. Will you please print it again? So here it is. Socialism. You have 2 cows, give 1 cow to your neighbor. Communism. You have 2 cows, give both cows to the government, and they give you some milk. Fascism. You have 2 cows, you give all the milk to the government, and the government sells it. Nazism, you have 2 cows, the government shoots you and takes both cows. Anarchism, you have 2 cows, keep both cows, shoot the government agent, and steal another cow. And capitalism, you have 2 cows, you sell 1, and you buy a bull. That's us. That's who we are. We're producers. We're thinkers. Which part of government and which part of society is the most important? It's the people that produce, the people that create wealth. These people do just the opposite. It's their entire mission to do the opposite and to get us in a place where If we can't afford to pay our bills, then we lose our idealistic qualities. Because if you're hungry, you don't have time to mess around with that kind of stuff. And sadly enough, they're on a step-by-step process to get us there.
Jason Kenney has spoken out about the possibility of a sovereignty referendum, suggesting that if such a vote was allowed, it would destroy families, tear apart communities, and that he'd be willing to take on a public role to combat it if it does happen. Comments?
Well, this is why I'm doing everything I can to prevent a vote, because Mr. Lukasik's vote is a yes-no question. It is a separatist referendum. He may be trying to characterize it differently. But if you ask people if you want to remain in Alberta, yes or no, there are implications if people answer no.
So apparently yesterday the Premier said that if we win this vote, they're going to have a binding referendum in the spring of 27. Now I don't know if we believe that. However, she's under a lot of pressure right now based on her position. Now, I'm going to go there for just a minute, and I'm going to explain something to you about our relationship, mine and hers. I spent a lot of time working for her. I spent a lot of time doing her bidding, basically. I was the part of Take Back Alberta when we fired Jason Kenney. We looked for a leader. We chose Danielle. And away we went, and we did everything we could to make her premier, and we did. And I thought up until 2 months ago that she was literally on our side of this. And my biggest disappointment is that she didn't stay on the fence. She could have stayed on the fence. And as a consequence to that, 70 or 80% of her base is angry with her. And I believe that that's the pressure that ended up making her actually say that if we win this referendum vote, we will have a vote. Because pressure is everything in politics. But I want you to look at this. Danielle Smith, Mark Carney, Pierre Poilievre, Thomas Lukaszuk, Naden Nenshi, and Jason Kenney are all against us. Right? Who's representing the Conservatives in government? There's no one left. It's us. So here's the lesson that we have to learn, that I had to relearn. You can't depend on them to do it for you. We have to do it ourselves. So we're having a rally in Edmonton on August 29th at 1 o'clock. Please come, show up, stand there, and scare the hell out of them. Let's get 20 or 30,000 people there. We have to understand at this point moving forward now that this is the most important thing we're going to do for 60 days. Whatever we need to do to get this over the line now is what we have to do. Within the law, peacefully. All right, so all of these people are against us. But you know what? I think we're winning, and I think we can win. All right, so here's the problem. The problem is, and why things won't change, is because equalization feeds everybody but Alberta. Per taxpayer, New Brunswick gets $6,500 a year, Nova Scotia $5,800, PEI $6,100, Quebec $2,800, Manitoba $5,800. How many of those provinces do you think would vote to open the Constitution? Because they would lose that. That's $12,000 per household for almost every one of those provinces. They're not going to change the representation. The system is built just exactly the way they want it to be built. Supreme Court judges are appointed by the Liberals, and we're not Liberals. Equalization payment, Alberta pays $13.6 billion every year, and we're mad, and guess what? We get no special projects. If you were the engine of the country, if you were running a business, and you had a portion of your business that was producing more than everybody else, and actually in this case, everybody is losing money except this part. We're the only province in Canada that's not in recession. Why would you not do something to keep them happy? Like, why would you not say, okay, well, you know what? We kind of want to keep you here, so let's do something for Alberta. Let's do something for Albertans. Have you seen that? It confuses me. I actually wonder why. Why do they insist on pushing us so hard that, there's no way, there's no olive branch there from any of them? And that concerns me because, you know what, it's so nonsensical that it makes me wonder why they're doing it and what I'm missing. Do they want us to go? Right? Because that's the way they're behaving. 7 out of 10 provinces have to open the Constitution. We just saw 6 or 5 that would never open the Constitution. It's never going to happen. So Danielle's got those open the Constitution things, not happening. All right, now here's something that I want you to pay attention to very carefully. Do you consider that your money is your private property? Okay? Is your money your private property? So how is it that, so when you pay your pension, you're sending your hard-earned money, which is your private property, which is according to 9213 of the Constitution, belongs to you. All the private property belongs to Alberta and Albertans, and it's the purview of the provincial government to take care of it. Okay? So you send them a certain amount of money a month, and if you earn $60,000 a year with your matching contribution from your employer, you should be getting $5,500 a month in pension at 8%. Okay? They're telling us that CPP is actually paying more than that, so 9%. So they're taking your private property, putting it on their balance sheet, which they can't do because it's not their money. This money belongs to the seniors of Alberta, paying you, what do you get, $1,200 a month instead of $5,500 a month? Keeping the $4,000 for themselves. And then when you pass away, they're keeping that too. That's not a real pension plan, right? What do we hear? Hands off our pension. We can do better here. You could have a private pension here. Even at $60,000 a year of income, which in Alberta is pretty average, of $5,500 a month would change every senior's lifestyle dramatically. Right? So here's how this works. Alberta's always overcontributed. Alberta pays $9 billion a year in CPP. Okay? That's our workers contribute that money. That $3 billion goes into a fund for Alberta seniors. That money does not belong to the federal government. It belongs to you. Your private money. So with that overcontribution of $3 billion over time, plus interest, it's $400 billion now. So our premier, who has had that conversation with me, we have discussed the fact that we should go out on the road and increase the awareness of how good an Alberta pension would be, and we move the needle from 30% support to 55% support in 100 town halls. But she didn't call the money back. She can call that money back anytime she wants. That amount of money today is $400 billion. Your money. That money belongs to you. And what's the first thing the federal government says to you? The Canadian government? You're not going to get your pension if you leave. So, what does that mean? And it's not true, because you're going to retain your Canadian citizenship, and you can get your pension, your portability clause, you can get paid anywhere in the world. But it's a fear tactic that they're going to use, and for the most part, fear is what's selling this, because they have no defense. I was in, where was I at? Spruce Grove on Monday. Where was I the other night? I was in another place, Dennis, Airdrie. I was in Airdrie, and Dennis, the guy that was organizing it, said he was going to ask anybody to come and debate me on the benefits or the negatives of Alberta independence. Couldn't get anybody to come, because there's no defense for them. There's no reason for us to stay. And that's sad. All right, but Mr. Carney, rather than invest it here, your money, invest it in India, $100 billion, of which half of it belongs to Alberta. To 47 over contribution every year. $44 to $47 billion. It's in our Value of Freedom. It's all there. Value of Freedom's online at app.com. Last 10 years, here's a picture that should scare you to death. What is the New World Order? Play that, Max.
I think the biggest security threat to Canada is China.
We're heartened by the leadership of President Xi Jinping and the speed with which our relationship has progressed in recent months. And I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
So we're in communist China saying that the biggest enemy we had 6-8 months ago was the communist Chinese, and now we're setting ourselves up with the leader of the most powerful communist country in the world for the New World Order. And I'm asking you, what is the New World Order? Because I've asked the government and they're not answering. I found out the other day that if you are running for a position in the UCP and you have brought up New World Order, they're going to decline you. So I want to know why. What's the New World Order? Well, what do we know? You will own nothing and you will be happy. How's that work? Listen to this for a minute. Go ahead, Max.
The lust to control other human beings is a story as old as time. There's a very strong drift in the direction of globalization, of the ultimate centralization of control in the hands of unelected officials at supranational organizations.
They want all of the resources of the world in their pocket.
The bigger picture is that an attempt is underway now to collapse liberal democracy and replace it with global technocracy.
This is a coup. They're saying we can control with rules. We don't need currency anymore.
It's like an inverted prison. You are supposedly free to roam about, but everything you want to access is behind lock and key.
The potential.
Does that scare you?
The lust.
Does that scare you? So what's with these AI centers? So what I'm trying to tell you is what I said at the beginning. We've got all this stuff that's happening at warp speed, and nobody's answering any questions. Why do we need AI centers? Both sides are against AI centers. But what are they for? So do we want to participate in AI? Well, if we don't participate in AI, and the other side participates in AI, we're going to be way behind. So we have a problem. And what's the problem? The problem is that we can't let bad people control our AI. So how are we going to do that? Well, we have to become government. Simple. Very hard to do, but simple. When the movement becomes government, we can take care of ourselves. So how do you do that? You get on boards. The left has been doing this for 30 years, 40 years. They're getting on boards, they're making decisions, they're making rules, they're doing all that stuff, and that's how they're winning. That's how we ended up here. Our people are so busy working and earning, and we do well for the most part, all of us, and it's good. But we've noticed things are getting more expensive, our kids can't afford to move out, all that stuff is happening now. You go to the grocery store, it's like you're buying a truck every time. So our attitude has been that we're going to do the work and we're going to work really hard, but as a consequence to that, we've been ignoring what's been going on in the background, and they're making all the rules and taking over all the institutions. And we have to have that back. So that's what we're talking about today when we're talking about our Constitution, which is a paper, it's a discussion paper, and this discussion paper is going to be something that every Albertan can participate in. And you can go to our website, there's a link there, you can put your suggestions and everything in it, because that's what it's designed to do. What that is, why we put that out, is this. I want you to get used to the idea that you can make the rules. Imagine, we make the rules. Scott's going to come out, and Scott's going to show you all of these things that we suggest that you think about. And if we work really, really hard and get our 2 and our 1 and win the referendum vote, then there's going to be a constitutional conference of the people. So people say, oh, well, what if we win and then nothing changes? Well, it's up to you to make the change. We're going to have to go to a constitutional conference and make the change. Or we're going to have to be happy with this. $187 billion worth of infrastructure spending finds 20,000 missing projects. I remember when a $16 glass of orange juice made an MP resign. Federal government officials are required to certify that all services and deliverables in the contract were received prior to the release of payment to a contractor. Okay? We found, this is from the Auditor General of Canada to Parliament in 2025, we found that in 54% of contracts examined, federal organizations had evidence to show that all services and deliverables were received. In 46% of contracts examined, we found that the federal organizations had little to no evidence to support that deliverables were received, and despite this, the federal government officials consistently authorized payment. 46%. And nobody's going to jail. Did we elect kings? Do we want to change it? There's only one way to change it. You got to show up. You just have to show up and stand in a spot and let them know that you exist and that you know and you're not happy. Because they print money, they have power, they have media, but they don't have numbers. We have the numbers. Otherwise, this would all be done. 46%. Mr. Gilbo walked away with $254 million, $130 million over here. And here's the other problem. Like my original quote, when the judges protect them, ArriveCan, they found guilty on, they sealed it for 75 years, right? $11 billion in overseas gender programs. How would you like to do an audit on that? The money leaves here, $11 billion on gender programs. So here's the point. When I was at the last year's AGM 2 years ago, they said to me, hey, Mitch, what would it take for you to, think about staying in Canada? I said, an audit with teeth. That simple. An audit, a real audit. Take these people, and we should hear the truth, and if they broke the law, then they go to jail and they pay for it, just like we would. Because how can our society run if we have rules and they have none? There's obvious they don't have rules. CSIS said China's a big threat. We knew that. We just got that from the last slide. 11 federal candidates, China aided. How many of those 11 do you think crossed the floor? Do the research. There we go. You can buy votes. Oh, here. Who needs votes when you can buy the seats? Out in the open. Basically a brown paper bag full of money. $500 million contract for, 2 employees to come across. 4,000 organized crime groups in Canada. Why? Because they let them. All right, top fentanyl. In BC, they're talking about offering smokable fentanyl to back safe supply. So you can buy anything on the street of BC. Do you know what I found out the other day? Do you know what it costs for a hit of fentanyl on the street downtown Calgary? $3. $3. How about that? So do they want to hurt our people? My question. $3. All right, media. I remember when I watched the CBC and I thought they were telling the truth. I did an interview with them today. I said, this is, what's her name from the CBC? I said, what's the CBC up to today? Well, we want to talk to you about your Constitution. I said, okay, let's do it. Do you believe that they're going to represent my position? I did it anyway. I did it for fun. Anyways, in 2019, C-39 was voted on and passed in Parliament to remove the fact that that media had to tell the truth. It's not C-39, actually, it's C-32. It's a different one. But here's what happened. In 1982, Trudeau made a Canadian Constitution that said it was against that, and there was a court case after that, and it said it was against the freedom of expression of the newspaper to have to tell the truth. So the newspaper has the same rights as the people. So you can have freedom of expression, you can say whatever you want, but now they extended that, they projected that to the news media. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. If you were making laws for the free and independent Alberta, do you think institutions should have to tell the truth? So how are you going to make up your mind about what's going on out there, and you probably know people that have a hard time doing that, if you don't know what the real truth is? And how much easier would it be if you did? And how much easier is it to manipulate you and to take you down this path if you really don't know what's true? Because I got to confess this, honest to God. I think about this every single day. What if I'm wrong? Right? Oh my God. I know I'm not wrong. Immigration. 15 million immigrants since 2015. The volume is unsustainable. It doesn't matter who they are. It's the volume that's unsustainable. It would be like if you had a house that slept, you had 3 bedrooms, and you put 36 people in it. You'd have to have shifts. And that's what's happening. And it may be on purpose. Because this gentleman works for the United Nations, and this is what he said. We must use migration to turn the English people into a minority in England. This will allow us to undermine the identity of the native English and import a new majority that will end the very idea of England. This is critical for globalism to take a hold of England. So we're talking New World Order globalism. This is a Sutherland who worked for the United Nations in 2006. Taxes. Why do they need to collect so many taxes when they print money? Ask a question. Should they teach us in high school, if you write these great big, if you print all this money, and you're the government of Canada, and it's on paper, who the hell do you owe it to? And why do you have to pay interest on that? I don't know the answer. I'm really seriously serious. There must be a reason why we have to pay it. The Fed in the US, that prints US dollars, is a private company of bankers, right? What's our prime minister? A banker. And what's their goal? We saw it in that thing. They want to get unelected people running the world, which would be them. In his case, not so that they can control all the resources. What's the biggest resource-rich place in the whole world? You're sitting in it. We have more to lose than anybody. We have to decide whether we're going to stand up and protect ourselves, or if it's worth it. But here's the problem, the way I see it. Everything's speeding up. It's going warp speed, and we're not keeping up. Because we can't keep up with all the information. So 43% in tax is what we're paying. So our Constitution says we don't have to pay that much. And we'll let Scott get to that. And here's the problem. You cannot create wealth if you keep turning down work. And that's what our problem is. That's why everything costs so much, because our GDP is so low that we turn down Germany, Japan, Poland, Greece, Taiwan, South Korea, and the Philippines. They asked for liquid natural gas, and we said, no, it's not in our business plan. So our business plan is not to create wealth. Our business plan is to get poorer. That's what's in our business plan. And bills like this sabotage us so that we can't get any richer. So we're going to be doing a podcast tomorrow morning with some young people. And they don't understand how come they can't afford a house. Well, there it is. Right there. There it is. You have to, when you're in business, you have to create wealth. If you have natural resources, it's in the ground and people want to buy it, that creates wealth. We'll get paid from that. Germany and Japan pay their bills. So we would get paid for that, would put everybody to work, we would have a boom, everything's good, the world's a good place. Our kids can afford houses because they're going to work, and they're working for big money, right? All right, the C-bills. Totalitarian bills, all of them. I'm just going to delve into C9. The Premier said in a press conference 2 weeks ago that we're not going to enforce C9 because it's an infringement on your freedom of speech. And she said, we are not going to do that. We are not going to allow the city police to enforce that because they had signs on the side of buses saying that if somebody says something hateful, report it to us. So where do we live? In 1984, apparently. Right? So the Premier says, no, we're not going to do that. But the question and the problem is, our federal government actually made that law and knows that it's an infringement on our freedom of speech, because she knows. So there's the problem, in a nutshell. All of these other bills are equivalent to that. And we can't keep up to them. They pass 4, 5, 6 at a time, and here we go. C8, kick you off the internet. Without your permission. You got no way back either. Printing money. I heard today that they went to Fort Knox and they found millions and millions of dollars worth of gold there. Money has been devalued, that's 1971. The money is devalued 85% from then to now. The dollar's worth 85% less than it was in 1971 because of all this inflation. All right, C9, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about. They're passing laws that are clearly against our Constitution, that are clearly going to hurt you if they're allowed to carry this stuff out. C9 is a hate speech law. If you said it a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they can go into the internet, find it, take you, charge you, and do whatever they want with you, basically. Because here it is. Mark Miller in debate says the Bible and Torah are hate. Freedom of religion. Down the toilet here. There used to be exemption for religious groups that they were not going to be thrown in jail for saying what's in the holy books, because those were written thousands of years ago and things are different today. This enables the government to target religious individuals as part of a group. This is exceptionally evil and broad and typical only of communist countries. Here's the kicker, and the last thing I'm going to tell you today. The punishment clause, the forfeiture clause. And it's been debated, this bill is passed, and people have brought it up and wanted them to change it, and they did not change it, okay? It says, may in addition to any other punishment imposed be ordered by the presiding provincial court judge or judge to be forfeited to his majesty in right of the province in which that person is convicted for disposal. What the heck does that mean? Well, I think it's permission to commit atrocity, right? So that's where we are today in Canada. In spite of the fact that we don't want to think we're there, we're there. We don't want to admit we're there, but that's the easy way out. The hard way is to do the work now and get ourselves out of this mess peacefully while we still can, and we'll help you every step of the way. Please support us, send money to us. Doesn't have to be much, at 235,000 people. Everybody sends us $20, we're in Valhalla. Really, doesn't have to be much. But here's the thing that's non-negotiable. You got to show up, and you got to bring people. You got to show up. It's non-negotiable now. Now we're in the last 60 days of this. You got to show up. You got to bring people to vote. You got to come. We cannot replace you. You have to be there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mitch. I always enjoy listening. Even if I've heard it, I will listen again, because every night's a little different. So before I introduce our second speaker, I'm going to tell you that there's donation buckets being passed, which is what we do because this is a volunteer organization, and I would like to acknowledge that I know many of you in the room, and that I see you at other events, and I know that you give. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart, because it's the heart and soul of people like you that are going to make this over the finish line. So if you can, put in the bucket. If you can't, we understand, and thank you so much. Here's a beautiful sign. Now everybody's been asking, where's the APP sign? We've got this sign, that sign. There's many beautiful signs, and I'm glad. But here we have our APP sign. So you might have wondered why it took so long for us to release a sign. And that's because the Alberta Prosperity Project is not a third-party advertiser. And the rules are very tricky. They would love to force us to do something we don't want to do. So every piece of literature that we produce, every sign, everything we do is usually designed several times because we must be so careful. So this beautiful sign is our APP sign. It actually doesn't have APP on it, but it does have For the Love of Alberta. And For the Love of Alberta is the tagline on our website, and that's how you know this is from APP. But we had to land on something that would not destroy the Alberta Prosperity Society, because too many years of work have gone into this to have lawfare used against us and destroy us. So there's a few here tonight. The first one's off the presses, and there will be more coming. The wonderful volunteers that are running all over the place putting signs up, they're going to have a whole bunch. But the few that are here tonight are for your taking. If you have a couple bucks, put them in the donation bucket. Feel free to take these home and brag that you're one of the first ones to get these. So, as I said, the Alberta Prosperity Project is a volunteer organization, and nobody gets paid, and it's good heart. People get out and just do this because we believe in the cause. And the gentleman that I'm going to introduce to you next, he doesn't get paid either, but he has books. He's an author, and I would ask you to please support him in buying his books. They're very well written. And I bought them specifically to lay about my house so that when my children and grandchildren come along, well, my goodness, Nanny's got a new book. That's the way I can introduce things to my family that I can't bring out in just a direct conversation. So who's my next speaker? Michael Wagner. Michael is an author, an independent researcher, a writer, a columnist for the Western Standard. He has a PhD in political science from the University of Alberta. And as I said, he's an author of books on Christianity and politics. He is currently involved with the Alberta Independence Movement. It is my honor to introduce Michael Wagner.
Thank you, Lynn, for that very kind introduction. Actually, this is my third time to be in Rimbey. My second time was just in February. Our very first time to come to Rimbey was on our honeymoon. This is where we came for our honeymoon when we got married in 1989, because we were living by Edmonton and we were dirt poor. So this is as far as we could come for our honeymoon. So we're not as poor now as we were then. So if we got married now, we could probably make it all the way to Calgary or something like that. So, but we do. Rimbey is very special to us because of that fact that we had our honeymoon here. So the point of my talk tonight is that Alberta must choose between the status quo and independence. I think most Albertans currently feel that our province is not being treated fairly within Canada. Of course, we'd prefer to be treated as an equal province within Canada, like the other provinces, an equal partner within Confederation. I do think, actually, that the old motto of the Reform Party, the West wants in, is still the true heart's cry of most Westerners and most Albertans. You could easily get a majority of Albertans to agree that we could stay within Canada if Canada could be reformed so that they would listen to us and treat us equally. That is what people really want, a reformed confederation where we could be treated equally. Unfortunately, we cannot have what we want. The reform option for Canada is not available. For decades, Albertans and other Westerners have tried to get a better deal for the West, but to no avail. The problem is that while the West wants in, the East does not want us in. That is the fundamental problem. Therefore, in my view, Alberta is left with only two choices: the status quo or independence. Now, the Prairie provinces have had serious grievances with Confederation right from the very beginning, like over 100 years ago. And there were many people who'd get involved back in those days to fight for a better role, a better place for the prairies. Like we would form alternative parties like United Farmers of Alberta or Progressive Party of Canada to try and fight for a better place for us within the Confederation. But in those days, there was no movement towards independence. We did not get a movement towards independence in the West until Pierre Trudeau became Prime Minister in the late 1960s. The problems that we had throughout the first decades of our existence within Canada were not as serious as they would become once Pierre Trudeau became Prime Minister. Pierre Trudeau wanted to fundamentally change this country. He wanted to centralize more power in Ottawa, and he wanted to move this country in a more socialistic policy direction. Now, one of the things he did was to unleash a political and economic attack on Alberta that was unprecedented in Canadian history. The federal government has never attacked a province the way the federal government attacked Alberta under Pierre Trudeau. In 1973, Pierre Trudeau's government imposed an export tax on oil from Alberta. Like Alberta was already exporting oil to the United States. And in 1973 also, there was a war in the Middle East that led to a dramatic increase in the price of oil. Like we got our first major oil discovery in Leduc right in 1947, and that was very helpful for Alberta that we have a resource like that. But the price of oil back in those days was, $2 to $3 a barrel, maybe $3 a barrel by 1973. But when the war in the Middle East broke out, within a few weeks, the price of oil had gone up to $11 or $12 a barrel. So Alberta could finally cash in on the resource that we'd had for those years, and we really benefit and get ahead. But by putting this export tax on oil, that meant that when Alberta exported its oil to the United States, the federal government was getting a huge share of that revenue that did not belong to the federal government, because the oil resources were Alberta's resource, and we should have been getting more of that, and the federal government was taking that. Also, Pierre Trudeau imposed an artificial price on oil within Canada to keep the price of oil that we sold to other parts of Canada really low, so we did not get the benefit of the price of our oil that we should have gotten when it was sold in other parts of Canada. So throughout the 1970s, our Premier Peter Lougheed fought Trudeau over those things so that Alberta could get a fair share of its own resource. And despite Lougheed's best efforts, things got worse in 1980 when Pierre Trudeau brought in the National Energy Program. The National Energy Program devastated Alberta's economy, destroying businesses, destroying jobs, and devastating the lives of thousands of people. And I still meet people at various meetings who will tell me about their own family's losses from the National Energy Program, their dad losing his job or their family losing a home and stuff like that. There's people who were very, very significantly hurt from the National Energy Program, and there's many of them who still remember that today. Now, two of the Liberals' stated reasons for the National Energy Program was to create energy self-sufficiency for Canada and to Canadianize the oil industry. Like much of the oil industry was owned by American companies, and Trudeau wanted to Canadianize it by taking control back from the Americans because they thought the Americans owned too much. Those are the publicly stated reasons. But we found out later, and this isn't a surprise really, but we found out later that those publicly stated reasons were not the real reasons that brought in the National Energy Program. And we know that because Marc Lalonde, who was the energy minister at the time of the National Energy Program, he spoke to a journalist a few years later and admitted that those reasons they gave publicly were not the reasons that the National Energy Program was brought in. And this is what Marc Lalonde said. The major factor behind the NEP wasn't Canadianization or getting more from the industry or even self-sufficiency. The determinant factor was the fiscal imbalance between the provinces and the federal government. Our proposal was to increase Ottawa's share appreciably so that the share of the producing provinces would decline significantly and the industry's share would decline somewhat. So the real purpose of the NEP essentially was the federal government to take more and more of Alberta's money so that the federal government would have a bigger share of the oil money than Alberta would get. And let me repeat that this sort of attack by a federal government on a particular province is unprecedented in Canadian history. Only Alberta has suffered that kind of a situation. Now, the pent-up anger towards Trudeau would contribute to the rise of the Reform Party. Like the actual event that led to the rise of the Reform Party was something that was done by Brian Mulroney, but there was pent-up anger from all those years of Pierre Trudeau being the Prime Minister. You might remember that in the early 1980s, Canada had bought the CF-18 fighter jets as our new jets, and they needed to be maintained, and it was a very big government contract to maintain the CF-18 fighter jets. There was only 2 cities in Canada with the facilities to maintain those jets, so the federal government held a competition to see which of those cities would be best to maintain the CF-18 fighter jets, and Winnipeg won that contract based on the government's criteria, so Mulroney gave the contract to Montreal, even though Winnipeg had won it by the government's own criteria. And of course, we knew that was because of political reasons that the Mulroney government was going to favor Quebec over a Western province. So that led to tremendous outrage in the West, which led ultimately to the creation of the Reform Party of Canada. Now, when the CF-18 contract was awarded to Montreal, Albertans realized that it didn't matter necessarily which particular political party was in power in Ottawa, because whoever's in power in Ottawa has to favor Central Canada over the West if they want to stay in power. That's where the votes are. If they want to stay in power, they have to cater to that part of the country. So the Reform Party of Canada was formed under Preston Manning, and Preston Manning wanted a party that would advocate for the West getting equal treatment within Canada. Instead of talking about getting out of Canada, that's when the slogan came in, the West wants in, which essentially meant that we wanted constitutional changes so that the Western voice could be heard within the national government. The best way of doing that, of course, would have been the Triple E Senate. So the Reform Party was formed to represent the West, and in 1993, the Reform Party won 52 seats in Western Canada, and it won even more seats in 1997. But the desired reforms that we wanted from the Reform Party did not materialize. And why not? Because the federal government does not care what reforms Alberta wants in the political system. Now, I got a quote here, a long quote I want to read from 2 academics, Roger Gibbons from University of Calgary and Lolene Birdall from University of Saskatchewan. They wrote a book together, and this is a quote from the book about why the Reform Party was unsuccessful, and this is what they wrote. The Reform Party's clarion call that the West wants in was widely derided outside the West as narrow regionalism unsuitable to a truly national party. Indeed, the party system has helped to define regional in the case of the West, and the West alone, as somehow antithetical to national. Parties based largely in Ontario and Quebec are self-defined as national, a definition generally accepted by the media and elite political discourse. Parties based largely in the West are defined and defined successfully by their opponents and the media as regional. The West is the only Canadian region earmarked in this fashion, and the only region with interests assumed to be at odds with the national interest, whatever that might be. So the West's interests are assumed to be at odds with the national interest, so they're not going to pay attention to us because we're obviously not in favor of the national interest. So besides the Reform Party, which ultimately petered out after it became Canadian Alliance and then merged in with to become the Conservative Party of Canada, besides the Reform Party experience, the attempt to reform Canada through the Reform Party, there was one other major effort, and that was Senate reform. Like when Peter Lougheed was fighting Pierre Trudeau in the 1970s over Alberta's oil industry, Peter Lougheed set up a constitutional committee that would recommend to the provincial government of Alberta constitutional changes that would make it beneficial, that would be beneficial for Alberta in Canada. And on that committee was a University of Calgary law professor who recommended to the committee that the West's voice be heard within the national government if we changed the Senate so that the senators were elected and there was an equal number of senators from each province. Because right now, our senators right now are still appointed by the Prime Minister. They make laws for us and they're appointed. We don't elect them. But this professor successor recommended an elected Senate with equal numbers from each province, and so that was kind of in the late 1970s. That's kind of the beginning of the Senate reform movement that would emerge. So in 1981, the Canada West Foundation, which is a significant think tank in Calgary, published the first major proposal for Senate reform. It was called Regional Representation: The Canadian Partnership, and it was co-written by Senator Ernest Manning, who had been Alberta's longest-serving premier under social credit. Him and two other major citizens wrote this proposal. So their central argument was that Canada needed to reform its national institutions in order to provide a voice for the West within the national government. They said if the West does not get a voice within the national government, the West was going to feel pressure to pull out and become its own country. So we could reform Canada this way. So a couple years later, in 1983, the Alberta Committee for an Elected Senate was formed to promote the Senate reform idea. It was at this time that Ted Byfield of Alberta Report magazine coined the term Triple E to describe the kind of Senate reform that they wanted. And that the idea of Senate reform spread from Alberta to BC and Saskatchewan, so they changed the name of that committee from the Alberta Committee for an Elected Senate to the Canadian Committee for a Triple E Senate. So by reforming the Senate this way, the Senate could properly represent the West's interest within the national government. Now the Triple E was symbolized three particular words. The first E was equal. There'd be equal number of senators from each province. The second was elected. The senators would be elected. And the third E was effective powers. So you'd have a powerful Senate with elected senators with an equal number from each province, and that would be a way of representing the West's interests within the national government. Now, the Alberta Progressive Conservative Party, which was our governing party at the time, endorsed that Triple E Senate proposal at a convention in 1984. The following year, in 1985, the Alberta government's Special Select Committee on Senate Reform endorsed the Triple E Senate idea as well. Also in 1985, Don Getty became a premier, and he publicly supported and endorsed the Triple E Senate idea. And 3 years later, he formed the Senate Reform Task Force to travel across Canada and promote the Triple E Senate idea to other provinces. And then in 1989, of course, Don Getty caused Alberta to have the very first Senate election in Canadian history. So there was an election in October of 1989 that was won by Stan Waters of the Reform Party, the very first time a senator was ever elected in Canadian history, and Prime Minister Brian Mulroney didn't want to appoint him, but he did because that's the way things had to be at the time. Anyway, despite this, there was kind of like momentum for the Senate reform at that time by 1989, 1990, but that Senate reform momentum started to die out. However, the Reform Party, as I mentioned, would later become transformed into the Canadian Alliance. Stephen Harper would become the leader. Stephen Harper would merge the Canadian Alliance with the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada to form the new Conservative Party of Canada, and then he became Prime Minister in 2006. And Stephen Harper, despite what you might think of him, he did believe in Senate reform, and he tried to use his office to advocate for Senate reform for Alberta and for the West. So he became Prime Minister in 2006. In May of 2006, his government introduced a Senate reform bill into the Senate, and Stephen Harper himself testified to the Senate committee that was studying that bill, which is something very unusual for a Prime Minister to testify to a Senate committee. A few months later, they introduced a Senate reform bill into the House of Commons, and this would have authorized consultative elections for senators in every province in Canada. So the way we've had some elections in Alberta where we'd elect people who would be recommended to the Prime Minister to be appointed to the Senate, that would happen in every province of Canada. That was what that bill was about, and also to put term limits on senators of 9 years. So those bills that I just mentioned died, but Stephen Harper's government would continue to introduce these kinds of bills into the Senate and the House of Commons, so that in their first 7 years of government, 3 Senate reform bills were introduced into the Senate and 5 were introduced into the House of Commons. So they were trying to reform the Senate. However, Quebec did not want a reformed Senate, and so the Quebec government did a reference case to the Quebec Court of Appeal, asking the Quebec Court of Appeal whether Stephen Harper's proposals were even constitutional. So when Stephen Harper's government saw what Quebec was doing, they decided to do a reference case right to the Supreme Court of Canada, so the federal government could be asking the questions of the Supreme Court rather than waiting for the Quebec questions to get to the Supreme Court. So Harper's government asked the Supreme Court about Senate reform in Canada, and to make a long story short, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that any of the kinds of changes that Stephen Harper wanted could only be brought about by a constitutional amendment. And you probably know how hard it is to amend the Constitution. I think Mitch might have mentioned that. And so it's essentially impossible to effectively to amend the Constitution in Canada. So that put a real end to the Senate reform movement in Canada, which a movement that had been going on for decades. So just like we worked so hard with the Reform Party, we worked so hard with Senate reform to try and get changes within Canada, to make the West and make Alberta feel comfortable within Canada. So here, let's take a look at Stephen Harper. Here was a man who became Prime Minister. He really believed in Senate reform, and he became Prime Minister, and he was thwarted every step of the way. The opposition parties opposed Senate reform. The Senate itself opposed Senate reform. There were some people within Stephen Harper's own caucus who opposed Senate reform because a lot of his MPs were from Eastern Canada. Of course, many of the provincial premiers opposed Senate reform, and ultimately the Supreme Court of Canada ruled essentially against it. So here was Stephen Harper, a man who was committed to constitutional reform to benefit the West. He became Prime Minister, and over a period of years used every tool at his disposal to try and reform the Senate. But he could not prevail in the face of intense opposition from Central Canada. This is the Prime Minister of Canada. If the Prime Minister of Canada can't do it, who's going to be able to do it? So if Stephen Harper could not reform the Senate, then it cannot be done. And if Preston Manning and the Reform Party cannot get the West's voice heard within Ottawa, then it can't be done. Albertans must realize that we sent very good people to Ottawa to fix the system, but the system could not be fixed. Spending the next few years trying to reform Canada's Constitution would end in failure and frustration, as it always has in the past. Now, when we look back at these things I've talked about, like the Reform Party and Senate reform movement, think to yourself, what more could we have done? When you think of the thousands of people involved in the Reform Party, tens of thousands of people, and the money they gave, and the elections and the votes, what more could they have done? And with the Senate reform movement, what more could we have done over those years? Alberta even held Senate elections, to get people recommended to the Prime Minister, and Stephen Harper appointed those. What more could we have done? We did everything we could. So the game is over, and it's time for Alberta to secede from Canada and become an independent country. With our... With our own country, we will be able to elect leaders who will answer to us and do what's best for us, not what's best for Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. In this way, we will be able to achieve the greatest level of freedom and prosperity possible for our families and our descendants. We need independence, not the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. He has so much knowledge. So now you all had cards on the chairs to write questions. If you have any questions that you've got written, I'm going to have a couple ladies that'll just be wandering. You can hand the questions to them. And you're bound to end up with more questions after these next two gentlemen. So just reminding you that we're going to do this by the cards. Something I must not forget to mention is, how do we get to the rally on August 29th? So we are organizing buses all over this province, and there is a bus that will be coming through Rimbey. So if you are thinking you might like to go, please check in with the busing. Now, Mark Grundy, Mark, oh, he's over there. Give us a wave. He's taking names, and he can give you the information on how to actually sign up for the bus. I believe it's going to be on the website, but I'm not sure, so I'm not going to say that it's there yet, but we're working diligently to make sure that the buses that are coming and the availability is there, because it's so important that we all show up. And with the price of gas, who can afford to drive anywhere anymore? So believe it or not, it's actually much cheaper just to hop on the bus and go. Brenda, what did you say? $25 a seat from Rimbey, up there and back. I dare you to figure out how you can drive your own vehicle up there for $25. So our next two presenters, the last presenters, are here to talk about the Foundation of Freedom document. I am so excited about this document. This document has been 5 years in the making in some people's minds. And Scott Payne has been working that long on not just the Constitution, but other documents, because he's a fierce defender of our rights and freedoms. And he's tried many different avenues, which he will explain to you, on how to protect us and make our lives better. He is one of the many drafters of the Foundation of Freedom, and he's a follower of Jesus Christ. His dad is also here, Lavar Payne, and Lavar is a former federal MP. He is also one of the drafters of the Founder of Freedom and a fierce fighter for us. I'd like to welcome Scott Payne.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Rimbey, for having us here tonight. Thanks to Lynn and the great team for making this possible. And thanks to Lynn for being the beautiful model of our new sign. So well done. First of all, a great crowd tonight, beautiful crowd. Thanks for coming. I'd just like to see a show of hands here. Who has read the Constitution of Canada? Okay, a few of us. Okay. Who has read the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? It's part of the Constitution. Okay. And who's read the Alberta Bill of Rights? Okay. So, which of those documents actually prevent all of the things that the federal government's doing right now? Bill C2, C8, C9, 263, 293, 63, 34, I believe. Yeah. So, 1867, we got the British North America Act. They amended it many times. It's now referred to as the 1867 Act. 1982, the Constitution was patriated from the United Kingdom. Queen came over. Who voted for that Constitution here? Some of you are old enough, right? Nobody? Right? Because we weren't allowed to vote. Premier Lougheed signed for us. Can you imagine that? The latter part of the 20th century, and we did not have the right and freedom to determine our own constitution. So I met Mitch Sylvestre, I think, in 2022. Anyway, whenever I first met him, he talked about constitutional conference. And he's been talking about it ever since. And we all need to be part of that. Who voted for the Alberta Bill of Rights that was amended in 2024 by the Smith government? Nope. I saw one hand go up and down, and then they realized it was a trick question. You couldn't vote for that one. The Smith government did not let us ratify it, did not let us even discuss it or make it, right? That was just what the government did. So the 21st century, we still don't have the right and freedom to make our own rights and freedoms, our own rules. Our God-given rights. We can't enumerate them. Only the government has that power. So we need to change that. So one of the things that I see in, just about did a Chevy Chase there, in government at all levels, it's lawless. So a third point there. So federally, does anyone know how many crimes the current federal government's committed? How many infractions of ethics? Are you surprised when you hear a new one every day? Are you surprised when they announce another $4 billion or $20 billion or $50 billion go to Ukraine or Europe or Africa or somewhere else? No, it's all theft, right? Money laundering. We're just so used to it. But even at the provincial government, who thinks that the provincial government doesn't follow the law? See a couple hands. Do we not have a law saying that when gas gets too high that they'll drop the fuel tax? Right? Do we not have a law? But they're not using it. You want some money back? Give them all your public or your personal information, right? And you might get $100. Checks in the mail. But we also have the AHS, alleged corruption. But what happened during the pandemic? They took away your rights, right? The ones that appear in the Charter. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, right? They coerced you and me and others into taking experimental medical treatment, right? They forced us. Lawless. They created winners and losers. If you had a big department store, you got to be open, but if you're just a small mom and pop, you're shut down. Oh, if you got a drive-through, you can get free masks from the government to give out to people. But again, if you're a little mom and pop restaurant, you're done. Right? And then, anyone heard of the Ingram and Scott case versus the government of Alberta? Jeff Rath was the lead counsel for it. That case, Jeff Rath and his team presented evidence, so emails and memos that the government had produced, and Justice Feasby agreed that the government, 9 ministers and 2 MLAs, were in misfeasance of office, essentially abuse of authority, because they were writing the Chief Medical Officer of Health's orders. Dr. Dina made her recommendations, but then the government said what the rules were going to be. So major, major corruption. And of course, we haven't had an inquiry, right? We've had a report. Nobody's gone to jail for any of the stuff that they did, right? And then what about our municipal governments? Do you think they're corrupt at all? Well, all levels of government spend more money than they take in. So children that are born in the future, they have a bill attached to them, a debt that they have to pay. That's kind of theft. But what about, say, the city of Calgary? Do you believe that you have in the Charter Rights and Freedoms the right to assemble and freedom of speech? You do, but they are really super temporary privileges. But the city of Calgary that doesn't write laws, they write bylaws, right? You know, just a step above a regulation maybe. But they wrote bylaw 17M 2023. So if a pastor, I don't know, maybe Derek Reimer, speaks outside of a library when the drag queen is reading to children, they go to jail, as he did. So your rights and freedoms of speech and assembly were overridden by a municipal government. And that bylaw allows them to put you in jail for 90 days and a $10,000 fine. It's lawless. So, upon a beautiful day when Alberta is its own nation, and I believe that will happen at some point, hopefully sooner than later, we need to change the rules. And as Mitch said, we need to draft the rules. And through a constitutional conference, we need to run that. And we need to show up in order to do that. And then we need to ratify it. It cannot be the government of the day that makes that the law. It's got to be the people, right? So some of the things that we see. I won't take up too much time tonight, but some of the things that you'll see in the Foundation of Freedom, and there are copies for sale at the back, but please do go on albertaprosperityproject.com, and some great news for Mitch. There's over 72 people have put feedback in already on it, and it's only been up online for a couple of days. So that's very encouraging. So I really hope that if you don't pick up a copy tonight, please go on the website. There's a link on the website, but there's also a link inside the document on page 2. Provide your feedback. It's not a full constitution. It's a constitutional discussion document because we need to start thinking about these things. We're not foisting anything upon Albertans. We're putting out some ideas, asking for feedback. Because just imagine that we became an independent nation someday, right? Yeah. And then we all show up at a hall, like this beautiful hall in Rimbey, and then somebody stands up, hey, do you guys want to talk about Constitution? What should we do? What should we put in it? No, let's be prepared, right? Let's have some good ideas already somewhat agreed to. So we can focus on the core, ratify that, and then we can do all the fringe stuff. Because there's going to be lots of difficult things to discuss. Some things will be easier. Rights and freedoms, hopefully, will be pretty easy. So you can see that the different things that are covered in it. It's not a full constitution, because there are some really difficult things that need to be discussed. And we all need to be part of that. So one of the biggest things that I see is failure in our current Constitution, failure of checks and balances. So we try to come up with solutions for those problems. There's never going to be a perfect Constitution. They'll always try and figure out a way. But if we make it harder for them, so if we put limits on government, right? Would it blow your mind? There's a website called constitute.org, and there's hundreds, maybe every constitution around the world, at least the ones that they can find. And from what we saw, there was not one constitution that actually had a limit on taxation within the Constitution. Isn't that insane? You're basically allowing your government to increase taxes because they can do that through subordinate laws. Your Constitution is your supreme law. God is always above that, but you've got your Constitution that limits all other laws. So that's one of the things we want, is limits on taxation. And how about one of the limits is no property taxes, right? Because if you don't pay your property taxes, they'll take it away. So that means you don't own it. So all kinds of good limits on government, and so constraints on government, or restraints on government, and constraints on government that they shall do things. How about the government issue free ID? Now, the reason I say that's not because they can't afford it every 4 or 5 years, but not everybody can. And certain people like to use that as an excuse. It's like, oh, we don't want to show ID to vote because, that's suppressing the vote. That's ridiculous. So if the government requires us to do something like have ID, then the government should be issuing that, so that there's no excuse when you show up at the polling station, right? Unless, of course, you lost it that day, but, that should be the rarest of circumstances. So we need to think about limits on government. And then one of the biggest things, so I talked about lawlessness, which is mostly corruption in government. So they're either stealing, or they're being fraudulent, or they're covering for things, they're allowing things that are unconstitutional or against laws. So our current federal government has the RCMP commissioner, which is under the executive, right? So the executive can fire the RCMP commissioner if he or she looks into a minister or the government. So we have that provincially as well. We have the public safety minister, we also have the attorney general and the justice minister provincially under the executive. So one of the options for a form of government would be a constitutional republic. Okay? By all means, put in your favorite version of that. Mitch has talked about the Swiss system. So there's lots of options out there. But what we did is we suggested a constitutional republic. So you can see at the far left, can everybody read judicial branch back there? You see that? Okay, well, I'll point. So judicial branch, okay, separate, right? Executive branch, separate. Currently in the House of Commons and in our legislature, the executive is part of the legislature. So you don't actually have legislators legislating freely. There is an appointment called the whip to whip the vote. So then basically you become almost a monarchy. And we do have a sovereign, the king, right? But the premier or prime minister of the day have that almost king-like power, because if you have a majority in your legislature and you have your cabinet inside the legislature in your caucus, you rule the roost, because you can kick people out of your caucus with the whip if they don't do their due diligence or their proper thing to vote with the government. So we're saying have the executive separate. And then here we have the legislative branch, which we recommend would keep the legislative assembly and create a Senate. So you have that sober second thought, and you have representation by region or land, and the popular vote would be in the legislative assembly. So you would have a good rural balance in the Senate, and then the urban side obviously dominates because you got 2 centers of 1 million people, right? So you bring some balance. And then the big thing we're recommending, and whatever form of government we recommend, have an oversight branch. An equal branch And their whole job is to look at the government. They're elected like everybody else. They have term limits like everybody else. But you have an inspector general. Make sure that we have all the stuff that we paid for, and we follow all the health and safety regulations that we make everybody else do. Then you have an auditor general. They look at all the books, do a quarterly report, publish everything so that other people can look at it too. Because part of the problem is secrecy. Mitch mentioned, freezing files for like 75 years. That's like JFK, right? We still don't know who killed JFK because they covered it up. The Hogue Commission for the foreign interference, that's like a 75-year thing. And Justice Hogue apparently worked in the law firm where Trudeau the Elder worked. There's no coincidences, by the way. And then the oversight branch have the Solicitor General, the top cop for all cops, lawyers, judges, appointed elected officials. And then that Solicitor General can investigate across to see if crimes are committed, and then refer charges to a grand jury. And they can also charge people who are not part of the government who conspire with the government. Okay? And then you have an elector general, runs the elections, is not under the executive, so they can't allow a certain two-letter agency to run rogue during, say, a referendum period, right? And then an attorney general to do those prosecutions. So this is the biggest check and balance that we're recommending. There's lots of good things in there, hopefully, but please go online, put in your feedback, be part of the solution, help build Alberta. Thank you.
I don't want to trip like Scott almost did. Anyway, it's really tickled to be here today. The last time I was in Rimbey, I think I was about 15 years old. I had some relatives that lived here, so it's a nice trip back. Beautiful country, and I want to thank everyone for coming out. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the various parts of this Constitution, but I also wanted to mention, Scott talked about the Charter of Rights and the Bill of Rights. So in both of those, federally and provincially, and actually the Premier added a poison pill to the Alberta one. So it's the same as the one we saw Justin Trudeau make everybody get a vaccine passport. And by the way, I always called them experimental injections. And the reason that is, that's what they were. However, because they wanted to call it a vaccine, they actually had to change the definition of vaccines. So that has caused all kinds of problems. And everywhere you went, you had to have your passport, so you couldn't go in for a restaurant. You could go in and order, and then you had to get out. So the interesting thing was that I like to say this little story is my wife and I and some friends, we often go over to the Medicine Hat Mall, and we go there for coffee and lunch or whatever. There's a big open area there, but during the vaccine mandate, they had security people there, and they had it all blocked off. So what you had to do was show your vaccine passport, take your food in, and then you could, guess what? Take your mask off, and you could eat. But fortunately, they had glass around them, and those little viruses, they just never made it past the glass. So because my wife and I and others never got the shot, so to speak, we called ourselves True Bloods. And from that point, we would sit in the hallway on some of these benches that they had there. We'd have our lunch as well. Anyway, aside from that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the rights and freedoms. So I'm sure most of you can read this, but every citizen will have the rights and freedoms. They will be equal. There will be no discrimination on that basis. And free from the state or the government, which we've seen both federally and provincially doing mandates, taking away our freedoms. And Mitch talked about Bill C-9, the hate speech. So they're taking away freedom of speech as well. There's a whole swack of bills, and in fact, I'm going to touch on one a bit later that has great concern for me as well. But Mitch did show up a whole bunch of them, like I think he had C2, C8, C9, and a bunch of others there. I gave a talk a couple weeks ago in Foremost on those bills, or at least on some of those bills. Anyway, you have the right of peaceful assembly. So during this mandate period, you might recall you couldn't gather anywhere. And in fact, people would try and tell others, hey, look, there's somebody sneaking into their garage. So we got a bunch of people together, and we called ourselves United Together for Freedom. So we met in a horse barn, and we brought food, and everybody ate. And that's where I met Dr. Modry the first time. So anyway, we had lots of fun, lots of laughs. And you know what? I don't think anybody got sick. Can you imagine that? So every citizen is equal under the Constitution. So, and every citizen who has attained the age of majority will be able to vote in any election as long as they're not serving a criminal charge that they've had to go to jail for. But what's happened right now are people who have committed crimes and are in jail. Do they get to vote? Yeah, they get to vote. Who did that for them? Those darn liberal judges. They changed at every opportunity. They kind of amend the Constitution a little bit, but guess what? No one else can do that. Okay, nobody can, oh, we're on the medical one here now, eh? Okay. So, under this proposed Constitution, everybody will have bodily freedom, autonomy. They won't be able to tell you you have to take certain medicine. They won't be able to tell you you have to go to this doctor. They won't be able to tell you what medications or alternate remedies that you can take. So this is going to be, it says in the proposed Constitution with comments coming from you folks, but basically we want to make sure that any medical decisions are your decisions. Those decisions for yourself and your children under the age of majority. And we also talked about, Scott talked about the property tax. And you know what? What is property? And Mitch talked about it. Money is property. Your car, your home, your firearms. So virtually all of that, and that belongs currently under provincial jurisdiction under the Canadian Constitution at this point in time. And no citizen would be discriminated on religion. So that's most of the stuff I really wanted to touch on. However, there's one bill that I was actually shocked about that was put forward, and every premier signed it. And it just gave me a huge scare, and that's Bill C-5. Anybody know what Bill C-5 is? That's the bill that allows the federal government to coerce every province to do a project. But you know what? We've seen the feds at every opportunity incursion into provincial jurisdiction. And the reason I say it, I'm really scared about it, because I see this as just the tip of the iceberg. And we talk about our own natural resources. Seems to me that this is the tip of the iceberg, that the feds will be coming after our natural resources because they've talked about it before. Anyway, thanks everyone for coming. God bless. Safe Safe journey home. Thank you.
Thanks, Lavar and Scott. Okay, I've had a few questions. If you have any more questions, raise your hand. Somebody will pick up the cards and bring them. And I think Max can get these mics going, and Mitch and Scott and Michael Wagner, everybody can be here if there's a question for them. You can come up. Do you want to come up? Sure, come on up. Because Max has got it all set up here. So remember, no question is a silly question, although there's one or two questions in here that I don't think we can answer. I really just don't think we know how to answer them, but we'll do our best here. Wherever you want us, Max. Okay, you guys stand there, and I'll ask the questions, and you guys just take the mics and answer. Okay, so we have to be out of here in about 15 minutes, so we'll try and move this along. So the first question I have is, what happens if Albertans vote against a referendum to separate? Does the movement stop? Mitch?
I would suggest no. I'd rather not deal with it, though. I'd rather win, but I can't see this cat going back in the bag. I mean, there's just too much information out there. I just can't see Albertans settling for what's going on for any amount of time. So there's other paths. Michael, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, when Quebec held its referendum in 1980 and they lost, René Lévesque at the night, you know, the election night, he went up, they just saw that they lost the referendum. You know what he said? Next time. Next time. They just kept working towards it, and they almost got it in 95. So if whether we win or lose, we've got work to do beginning of the next day. And if we lose, we're working for the next time as far as I'm concerned.
I like that. It's yours.
I'm going to do my best to read this one. From Jean Buchanan. From 1870 to 1924, Vladimir Lenin, like obviously my knowledge of history is not very good, was prime minister at communist Russia. Lenin is noted to say, we must stop calling ourselves communist as people will not like that. Instead, we should call ourselves socialists. Example, our RCF in Saskatchewan then changed to the NDP, who carefully follow the Marxist manifesto. How can we avoid the danger of their returning?
Show up.
Again from Jean. Our new laws and lack of freedom are all very ungodly and greatly offensive to our greater Creator God. This will prevent many blessings from the Lord, especially Carney's evil rejecting of Israel's support. Our best help is from the Holy Word for guidance. Can we work more on this? Yes, we're doing our best. I'm just going to say that's why I always open in prayer, and I'm very grateful that rural Alberta is firmly rooted in Christianity. Does anybody else have anything?
Yeah, we have to pray, and I say to almost everybody I talk to, we can't do this without God, and we shouldn't try.
Okay, this might be a Mitch question. How do we get rid of Daniel Smith?
You need to get 23 CAs to pass the identical motion to have a special general meeting on leadership. That's how we fired Jason Kenney. So that's doable. Right now, I don't know if there's 23 out there, but there may be people looking into that already.
Okay. If I may add as well, everybody needs to talk about all the bad things that the Smith government have done. Not just with the referendum, the Alberta Bill of Rights, the failure to sue the federal government to determine what our share of the Canada Pension Plan is. That's for almost 2 years. It's almost as if they don't want an Alberta pension plan. That was part of the Alberta Next panel. They also went against party policy regarding carbon taxes, signed some MOUs about that. You need to explain that to people. Also explain how poorly they're running the government. There was going to be a $9.4 billion deficit until the Americans started bombing Iran and oil prices went up. We're spending twice as much as Notley. Talk to people and teach them about those things. Because if we can't overcome the charm, then it will be much harder to get a new leader.
Hey.
So I just wanted to mention, you might recall there was all this hype about a pipeline, and you might recall that the Premier said you need private money, and you might recall that the Prime Minister said that. But now there's a flip and a flop, and now we want your public money. We want to build up a huge pile of debt that you will pass on to your children. And not only that, you're going to have to pay interest on that as well. So that's just another one of those flip-flops.
So you want to attend the AGM as well, please? Just so you know. The Premier will be there at the UCP AGM. It's going to cost you around $180 to $200 to go for the day. I'm going. I've already got my ticket. And tell her what you think. That would be the best thing that you could do. And if you're not happy, you won't be there by yourself. I promise. Pardon me? That's at the about
November 29th.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
it's
November 29th. 27. There you go.
So locally, the Rimbey Rocky Mountain House Sundry Constituency Association has not had their CA AGM. So you need to keep your ears to the grindstone for when that is called. You all need to have a membership now in order to participate and vote at that. So that's your homework for now, and tell everybody that lives in this constituency to get a membership. Because you can't participate if you're not a member. And we must show up at these AGMs. So please, buy a membership, show up, and maybe take a leadership role and find out if you know somebody or you yourself is willing to run and be a director or something on one of those boards. Because you, the people, when you stand up, then we get a say. Okay, this one. Why is the UCP aligning with Danielle in regards to the AI data centers?
I don't think we are lined up with Danielle. I don't think anybody's lined up with Danielle with AI. I think both sides, left and right, are against AI centers. From what I understand, it's North America wide. Even in the US, Democrats and Republicans are against AI centers. Because nobody knows what they are and they're not telling you. Everybody's scared of them, and as they should be. So as far as AI centers are concerned, they're the devil in the deep blue sea.
But isn't it interesting that the people of old got really organized and worked really hard, and now that one has been declined. So yay, people of olds. I know they worked really hard on that. So here's a question. With independence, what could our new Alberta do to handle Farm Credit Corporation FCC loans? Who wants to take that one?
What's going to happen to the farm?
Well, what could the new country of Alberta do to handle farm loans? So take over debt and
well, they just take it over and make you pay the interest to them. I think that would benefit them anyway. So all of those loans that are out there, I don't think you would have trouble even transferring the financial institution that you owe the money to, unless it's the Canadian government. And the Canadian government, unless they're giving you no interest, that would be a problem. That's something that's all going to have to be worked out. I don't see that mortgages or any of that kind of stuff is ever going to be a problem. I think the banks will want to take it over, and if we wanted to, Dr. Modry talked about a big line of credit, and the government of Alberta could cover those loans for you, but banks will do that if you have the equity.
Okay, how will separation affect the quotas like dairy and eggs?
Okay, I guess go ahead. Do you know, Lavar?
Well, I don't know about it. Back home, I'm good friends with one of the Hutterite colonies, and I can tell you they have such an absolute impressive process for their dairy cows. It's all automated, it's all computerized, and you know what? They are a way ahead of anybody else, and I think they'll do extremely well. I don't see it as a big problem, and I think that they would be working with the new government, and I'm not sure we'd actually see the supply management system as it is today.
So there's also safe supply there, right, too? So if you're going to have a quota on dairy, so you don't have to be a genius to figure out that if the southern U.S. Has 12 months of summer and they've got grass growing all year long, they don't have to put up feed, and they don't have to have insulated barns to keep their cows warm, so it's going to be cheaper to produce milk over there. But do we want to have to depend on that? So I would suggest that there's going to be a safe supply for Alberta and Canada, and I believe that if that's the case, then our farmers will be a part of that safe supply solution for us. So only a percentage of that dairy product will be bought from somewhere else. We'll have to have mandatory milk come from Alberta. And the other thing is that we can control what's in that milk by what we feed those animals, and make the rules so that it's healthier for Albertans than, say, having something else that we don't know what's actually in the food.
Mitch, do you remember the conversation that was had about all of the things that are prohibited? Our Alberta dairy farmers are not allowed to produce because those contracts are allowed to happen only in Quebec.
Yeah, well, for sure, and you know what, they can change those rules, and I don't really know that much about the farming industry. I've done 6 or 7 town halls at Hutterite colonies, and that's where I glean most of my information on this, is from them. So I just really, I'm not a farmer and I can't pretend to know.
But again, we need to get our farmers right on board with helping build this and plan it, because it's going to be their future. And what a wonderful thing that they get to plan their future and not be told what it'll be. Okay, if the Senate reform fight was beaten back, what makes you think our fight won't be hijacked by everyone, government, and all be destroyed? Who wants to answer that one?
With the Senate reform?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Senate reform could be blocked because it was under the control of the federal government. You had to convince Central Canada to agree to Senate reform in order for Senate reform to happen. But independence is different. Independence is just for Albertans to decide. According to Canada's constitutional law, a province can become independent if it has a referendum on a clear question and a clear majority of people vote in favor of independence. That's something we can do as Alberta, and if we vote in favor of independence, they can't stop us. Like, that will begin negotiations towards independence. Something else other than independence could potentially result if they make other kinds of concessions or offers or things like that. But independence can happen because they can't block it. If Albertans vote in favor of independence, we can become independent and they cannot stop it. And that makes it completely different from Senate reform, because we had to get the rest of the country to agree for Senate reform and they didn't agree. So that's how independence can happen without having to rely on other people. It's a completely different situation than Senate reform.
There's probably also another avenue as we get down this. I don't know how many of you remember the Prime Minister recognizing Palestine.
Yeah.
Show of hands? Oh, a bunch.
Oh, yeah, a whole bunch.
You know what? If we decide that we are going to become independent, who do you think might be one of the first countries to recognize Alberta as a sovereign nation? Israel, yes.
Okay, so now this is for you constitutional people here. There's questions. What is a nation? What is a republic? What do we want to be when we grow up? Nation or republic or country? Have at her. I don't know who answers that.
Do you want to? Or?
Go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead, Michael.
There's different ways of looking at it, but you can be a nation and a republic and a country at the same time. Like some of it's kind of interchangeable. It depends on how detailed you want to get onto the details. Like, for example, nation tends to be like a group with a common language and culture, so Quebec can put themselves forward as a nation. That's the way the word is often used, but it's not always used that way. Some people say, well, Canada's a nation, but we have English-speaking and French-speaking, so we have those differences. We can still be a nation, but a nation can also be considered a country. And then republic is actually a form of government. So, you can be you can, whether you're a nation or consider yourself a country, you can have a republican form of government, which is just generally speaking like a democracy that doesn't have a monarchy or like a king or a queen or something like that. So you could be all three of those things, generally speaking. So we didn't have, you'd have to make a distinction between, say, a constitutional monarchy and a republic. Those are different forms of government. But you can be a nation and a country, and they can be constitutional republics at the same time. I hope that's not too confusing. But some of the words we use are kind of interchangeable, and so it depends on how deep you want to go in the meanings. You know what I mean? But in colloquial speech, like the common way we often talk, we often say nation or country interchangeably. And then, like I say, the constitutional republic is just a form of government that would be over the country or the nation. Does that help at all, or?
Yes, it does, and thank goodness we had a man with a PhD in political science to help me with that, because I wouldn't have been able to say that at all. Okay, Jean again is talking about the AI centers and says, would it not be better to speak up against them because there seems to be many dangers? And I think basically Olds has proven if they're worried, band together as citizens, attend the things, and make your voice heard, because it worked there. And I think that that's just all that we can do. I don't think any of us know enough about the AI or thrilled about having it, so we need to really question these things. Okay, so this question is, how will you vote on questions 1 to 9? I don't know if we can speak about that tonight, because that is one of the things that they're tricking us into doing so that we will not be able to be the Alberta Prosperity Society. So my apologies, but we can't answer that question. So thank you all very much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed tonight. I hope you've learned some things. I hope you managed to get your copy of the Foundation of Freedom, and that you know it's on the website and you're going to interact. And you're going to tell everybody you know, and I'm going to see all your beautiful faces August 29th at the legislature. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, yes, and Max will be streaming the rally at the legislature.